Welcome everyone. Today we're going to demystify one of the most fundamental concepts in photography, the exposure triangle. If you've ever taken a photo that came out too dark, too bright, or just not quite right, this is where you'll learn why that happens and how to fix it. Don't worry if you've never touched a camera setting beyond auto. We're starting from absolute zero, and by the end, you'll understand exactly how your camera captures light. So let's start with the big question. What actually is exposure? In the simplest terms, exposure is just the amount of light that hits your camera's sensor when you take a photo. Too little light, and you get what we call an underexposed image. It's dark, muddy, and you lose all the detail in the shadows. Too much light, and the image is overexposed. Everything looks washed out and blown out, especially bright areas like the sky. The sweet spot in the middle is what we're always aiming for, a correctly exposed image where you can see detail in both the bright and dark areas. Take a look at these three examples. Notice how the correctly exposed one in the middle has that nice balance? That's what we're learning to control. Now here's where it gets interesting. Exposure isn't controlled by just one thing. It's actually three settings working together, and we call them the exposure triangle. The three corners are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Think of them like three faucets all filling the same bucket with light. Aperture controls how wide the lens opens, like how far you turn the faucet. Shutter speed controls how long the sensor is exposed, like how long you leave the faucet running. And ISO controls how sensitive the sensor is to light. Think of it like the size of the bucket. The key thing to remember is that these three are always connected. Change one and you'll need to adjust at least one of the others to keep your exposure balanced. We're going to look at each one in detail over the next few slides. Let's start with aperture, which is measured in f-stops. This one trips people up at first because the numbers seem backwards. A low f number like f1.4 or f2.8 actually means a wide opening. More light comes in. A high f number like f16 or f22 means a tiny opening. Less light gets through. But aperture isn't just about light. It's your main tool for controlling depth of field, which is how much of your image is in sharp focus. With a wide aperture like f2.8, you get that beautiful blurry background effect, perfect for portraits where you want your subject to pop. With a narrow aperture like f16, everything from front to back is sharp, ideal for landscapes where you want the whole scene in focus. Here's a quick way to remember. Small number, big opening, blurry background. Big number, small opening, everything sharp. Next up is shutter speed, and this one is pretty intuitive once you get the hang of it. Shutter speed is simply how long your camera's shutter stays open, how long light hits the sensor. A fast shutter speed like 1/1000th of a second freezes everything. That's how sports photographers capture a footballer mid-kick with zero blur. A slow shutter speed like 1 or 2 seconds lets motion blur happen. That's how you get those silky smooth waterfall shots or car light trails at night. One important rule of thumb for beginners: if you're shooting handheld, no tripod, try to keep your shutter speed at 1/60,000th of a second or faster. Anything slower and your own hand movement will introduce blur. It's not your fault. Nobody's hands are perfectly steady. If you need a slower shutter speed, grab a tripod or rest your camera on something solid. The third side of the triangle is ISO, and it's essentially your camera's sensitivity dial. At low ISO values like 100 or 200, the sensor captures light normally. You get clean, crisp images with minimal grain. This is what you want in bright conditions. As you crank the ISO higher, 1600, 3200, even 12800, the sensor amplifies the light signal, which brightens your image. The catch? Higher ISO also amplifies noise, that grainy, speckled look you've probably seen in photos taken in dim restaurants or at concerts. So think of ISO as your emergency backup. You've already opened your aperture as wide as it'll go, your shutter is as slow as you can hold steady, and the image is still too dark. That's when you bump up the ISO and accept a little grain in exchange for actually getting the shot. Modern cameras have gotten much better at handling high ISO, so don't be afraid to use it when you need to. Alright, so now you know the three settings individually, but the real magic is in how they work together. Think of it like a balancing act. If you change one setting, you need to compensate with another to keep the same exposure. Let me walk you through 3 real scenarios. First, a bright outdoor scene. You've got tons of light, so you can use a narrow aperture like f11 for sharpness, a fast shutter speed to freeze motion, and keep your ISO low at 100 for the cleanest image. Easy. Now move indoors without a flash. Suddenly there's much less light. You open up to f2.8, slow your shutter to 1/60,000th of a second, and bump your ISO to 1600. See how every setting shifted? Finally, a night cityscape on a tripod. You want light trails from cars, so you use a 2-second shutter speed. You can keep the aperture moderate at f8 for sharpness and ISO at 200, because that long shutter lets in plenty of light. This push and pull between the 3 settings is the heart of photography. Once it clicks, you'll never look at your camera the same way. Now let's talk about stops. This is the universal language of exposure, and once you understand it, everything ties together beautifully. A stop is simply a doubling or halving of light. 1 stop brighter means twice as much light. 1 stop darker means half. The beautiful thing is that all 3 settings, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, are measured in stops. So if you open your aperture by 1 stop to let in more light, you can increase your shutter speed by 1 stop to compensate, and the exposure stays exactly the same. Look at the table here. Going from f4 to f5.6 is 1 stop less light. Going from 1/125th to 1/250th is also 1 stop less light. Going from ISO 400 to 800 is 1 stop brighter. They're completely interchangeable. That's why photographers can quickly adjust on the fly. They're just swapping stops between the 3 settings. This quick reference chart is your cheat sheet. I'd honestly recommend taking a photo of this slide with your phone so you have it handy when you're out shooting. It breaks down each setting into 3 zones. For aperture, small numbers for blurry backgrounds, mid-range for general shooting, big numbers for everything in focus. For shutter speed, super fast to freeze action, moderate for everyday use, and slow for creative motion effects. For ISO, keep it low when you can, bump it up when you need to, and accept the grain at the highest levels when there's no other choice. And notice the summary lines at the bottom. These are worth memorizing. Lower aperture number means more light, faster shutter means less light, higher ISO means more light but more noise. Let's wrap up with 4 key takeaways that I want you to walk away with today. First, exposure comes down to 3 interconnected settings: aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. That's it. Those 3 control everything about how bright or dark your image turns out. Second, they're linked. Change one and you'll need to adjust another. It's always a trade-off, and that's okay. Third, stops are your common currency. Every adjustment is just a doubling or halving of light, no matter which setting you're changing. And finally, my practical advice for getting started: switch your camera to aperture priority mode. It's usually marked A or AV on the dial. In this mode, you choose the aperture and the camera figures out the rest. It's the perfect training wheels because you get to control depth of field while the camera handles the math. Practice with that for a few weeks and then start experimenting with full manual mode. Go outside and take pictures of anything such as your dog running around the garden, your colorful flowers, or the kids playing. Remember, with digital photography, you don't waste anything. Just delete the pictures you don't want to keep.